This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, which is now available on Kickstarter.
Grim Hollow offers a handbook for creating gritty characters in a dark fantasy setting, completely 5th edition compatible.
The book is packed with new character building options, including rules for blood magic spells and all new subclasses for every single 5e class.
Best of all, we are contributing to the book by creating several of the stretch goal subclasses, so the better the campaign does, the more we get to contribute.
We've got some really amazing ideas that we've been working on that we can't wait to share with you.
Like the Oath of Pestilence Paladin, a plague-bearing knight who spreads death and decay.
To check out Grim Hollow and more of the work that we're doing for the book, follow the links in the description below to find the campaign on Kickstarter.
And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are
the Dungeon Dudes.
Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are going to be ranking the various subclasses available to the fighter in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now, in officially published sources, there are currently 8 subclasses available to the fighter, so we've split this into 2 episodes, where we will be covering today the Arcane Archer, the Battle Master, the Cavalier, and the Champion. This video was shot before Tasha's Cauldron of Everything released, so once that book does come out, we will make a follow-up video looking at the new subclasses introduced in that book as well.
If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the criteria we use to rank our subclasses. The fighter is a very combat-focused class, so we are looking at the nuances of how it performs in combat. We are looking at the subclasses that are going to augment the core features of the class in meaningful ways. As always, we are not going to be taking role-playing into account here because every fighter subclass has an equal potential to be amazingly role-played. We will take multi-classing into account a little bit, but it is not the main thing we're looking at in our ranking.
And in general, we assume that you are playing in a game with feats, which is very important for the fighter in particular. We will be factoring that into the rankings when possible. And we also assume that you're going to be playing in a situation where you face between 2 and 4 combat encounters a day with an opportunity for at least 1 short rest somewhere in there. That's quite important for the fighter as a whole because it is a class that often relies on how many short rests it gets to take, because in most cases the fighter doesn't have any abilities that rely on long rests.
We're going to be taking a look at our rankings today, and then at the end of the episode, we're going to look at the community votes on these subclasses as well and compare the two together. So let's take a look at the first 4 fighter subclasses. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So the first subclass that we're going to be looking at today is the Arcane Archer, introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is a classic fantasy archetype that has been envisioned differently across many editions of Dungeons & Dragons, but it all tends to surround a fighter who uses a ranged weapon, in particular a bow, blending magic with their fighting style, oftentimes taken up by elves.
So like all fighters, the Arcane Archer gains features at 3rd, 7th, 10th, 15th, and 18th level. Right away when you pick this subclass at 3rd level, you're going to get Arcane Archer lore, which allows you to become proficient in either Arcana or Nature and gain the Prestidigitation or Druidcraft cantrip.
Also at 3rd level, we're going to get the big feature of the entire subclass, the ability that almost the entire subclass revolves around, which is the Arcane Shot power. When you gain the Arcane Shot power, you are able to select 2 from a list of several different magical infusions that you can use once per turn when you take the attack action with a short bow or a bow only. These abilities do not work with crossbows of any kind, nor do they work with thrown weapons or melee weapons either. The Arcane Shots can then be used twice before you need to take a short rest to regain them. Although at 15th level, you will gain the ability that when you roll initiative, if you don't have any uses remaining, you gain 1 use back. These shots also do some damage, and that damage is increased at 18th level as well.
So without going into too much depth on all the shots, there are some great choices here and there are some not so great choices. Some of my favorites would be things like the bursting arrow, which allows you to do an AoE effect of damage. I also really like enfeebling arrow, which allows you to target the biggest hitter, do extra damage to them, and possibly have them having their damage on their attacks. The other one that I really liked was grasping arrow, because there are many times in the campaigns I've played in where people have tried to flee, or I just want to create some distance between me and them. Either way, stopping an enemy in their tracks and making it harder for them to move without taking additional damage can be really helpful.
Me personally, I really like banishing arrow. I think the application of being able to just banish somebody for one round, even though it is only one round, is pretty useful and can be quite relevant. I also really like Shadow Arrow, and I think it is the must-have. Shadow Arrow causes the target, if it fails a save, to not be able to see anything further than 5 feet away from it. Because you're a ranged character, that would usually include you, because you're probably not standing too close to them. You now gain advantage on all your subsequent attacks against that target, which means that you can go to town and action surge and dump a bunch of the fighters' many attacks that fighters are well known for with advantage into the target. So if you're looking for the really great offensive one, Shadow Arrow is the way to go.
The other options like piercing arrow and seeking arrow might sound good on paper, and there are some really exciting qualities of them, but they are a little bit more niche in where you'll be able to use them. And with a limited selection that you get as an Arcane Archer, it's really important that you make the right choices, and the choices that are going to come up in more than one case or instance. Also keep in mind that a lot of these features do require the enemy to make a saving throw, so there is a chance of you blowing your arcane shot and then it not going through. So be wary of enemies that have really good saving throws that might stop you in your tracks from using these awesome abilities.
The other abilities granted to the Arcane Archer are the fact that at 7th level, all their arrows count as magical, which is great if you don't have a magic bow. There's actually not a lot of magic bows in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide and other sources, so this might be useful. The other feature that you get is Curving Arrow, which allows you to use a bonus action if one of your attacks misses to redirect the arrow to another target. I would much rather not have Curving Arrow and be able to take a Crossbow Expert with the subclass. I think it would really make a subclass overall much stronger. And that is my big reaction to the Arcane Archer as a whole. I think if we are talking about a ranged damage dealer that has some cool utility, we have to compare the Arcane Archer to the next subclass we're going to be looking at, which is the Battlemaster. And I think that the limited number of uses of these abilities, the fact that you are locked into using a bow or short bow, even though you can still use Sharpshooter, which is one of the best feats in the game and a must-have if you play an Arcane Archer, I think still makes this a little bit limited. One of the nice things about the Arcane shots is that you choose to use them when your attack hits, but there's still a saving throw involved. You really have to be pretty conservative, which means that most of the time, you're just going to wish that you were a crossbow expert. I give this a C. In light of the number of times that you can actually use the arcane shots, I think it actually makes the case that you might as well just take crossbow expert and carry an extra bow around with you for the few times that you want to use your arcane shots, and then default to the crossbow the rest of the time. But now you're just a worse Battlemaster.
I don't think it's as big of a detriment that you don't get access to the crossbows. I really like the idea of a character using a bow more than I do a character using a crossbow. If I was going to play an Arcane Archer, I've already bought into the bow-wielding fighter, and it does excel at making the Archer better. I gave the Arcane Archer a B. I do think that there are things that take away from it in certain instances, but I do think that there are reasons that it excels in certain instances, which puts it right in the middle ground for me. I think that some of the arcane shots are amazing. I do think that the curving arrow is a really nice treat, that if you miss your shot, you get to curve the arrow and hit a different target, making even your missed shots matter. Now, if I take the archery fighting style and I take the sharpshooter feat, I'm already going to be a very powerful fighter build. And in those key moments when it is essential, I can lay down an arcane shot and do some really cool things with it. So there are a lot of nuances here. There are the arcane shots that you might not want to take because they will never come up, but there are also the arcane shots that can actually do a lot of good in the right moment in the right battle. The reason why I'm giving it a B and not an A or an S is because when you compare it directly to something like the Battlemaster gets a lot of really cool maneuvers that are similar, not necessarily the same, but similar in concept to what you're getting with the Arcane Archer. But the trick here is that the Battlemaster gets more options for them. And I do think that is the big hindrance on the Arcane Archer. And yes, at 15th level, you get one extra use of it if you don't have any at the start of a combat. But the Battlemaster also gets that and is just going to get more. So I think the Arcane Archer would have benefited from having more uses of Arcane Shot, because the shots aren't any better, in my opinion, than a lot of the Battlemaster maneuvers. And if we had 4 or more of them to be able to use before needing to take a rest, I think this would have been an A subclass. But because it's a little bit more niche, I put it as a B.
The bonus damage on the arcane shots over the course of a combat encounter and over the course of an adventuring day will be paltry compared to the bonus damage of a complete extra attack as a bonus action every single turn. The limited number of times you can use the Arcane Archer's powers and the limited nature of their powers in general, combined with the fact that you're losing the opportunity to take Crossbow Expert with this class and still combine it with your utilities, really, for me, just yields this very unwieldy character that I think is still strong and still a good damage dealer, but it is not the best archer.
I see where you're coming from with this, and really, like, if we want to talk about it, a Battlemaster fighter who takes the archery fighting style, sharpshooter, crossbow expert, and uses their Battlemaster maneuvers in a meaningful way, which they get more of, is a better archer than the Arcane Archer. Get them a magic bow, and they're off to the races.
Yeah.
So it isn't even the best at what it's supposed to be the best at, and that means that it's a C.
It isn't, and a reflavored Battlemaster will be a better Arcane Archer than the Arcane Archer.
If you want to just flavor text that your Battlemaster maneuvers are magical in nature, you basically have an Arcane Archer that's cooler.
Now, we spent a lot of time talking about the Battlemaster as we were talking about the Arcane Archer, so we might as well talk about the Battlemaster properly. And as you can probably guess, there's a lot to love about this subclass. Every other subclass lives in its shadow, and let's talk about why.
When you choose Battlemaster right away at 3rd level, you're going to gain the bread and butter of what makes the Battlemaster amazing, and that is combat superiority. You get 4 superiority dice, which are D8s to start, and you can use these to fuel your attacks with extra features, choosing 3 right away when you choose this subclass. You gain an additional superiority die at 7th and 15th level, and your superiority dies go up to a D10 at 10th level and a D12 at 18th level. You use the superiority dice to fuel the maneuvers for your attacks, and you regain all of your superiority dice on a short rest. Finally, at 15th level, if you don't have any superiority dice left and a combat is initiated, then you gain 1 use of a superiority dice.
You start off with 3 maneuvers, and you gain 2 more at 7th, 10th, and 15th level. When you do gain new maneuvers, you can also retrain out old ones and mix and match. Now, we've done a full episode of our show talking about each one of the Battlemaster maneuvers in detail, so be sure to check that out up over here. But the long and short of it is that the maneuvers of precision attack and trip attack are money, particularly when combined with Sharpshooter, Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master, and Crossbow Expert. Because with the Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master feats, you take a penalty to your attack rolls. But Precision Attack allows you to then add your superiority die to the attack roll result to turn a miss attack into a hit. And Trip Attack gives opportunities for fighters of any stripe to knock their target prone, thus gaining advantage on attacks against them, and obviously you're going to trigger Action Surge and go to town on them.
Student of War gives you proficiency in a set of artisan's tools, which can be just a fun ribbon ability, and then Know Your Enemy is actually giving the fighter something to do in social situations, and we've seen it come up in our own Drakenheim campaigns and be really useful as a way to gather information on an enemy or monster. These aren't really the greatest abilities, but really with the rest of the Battlemaster package being so good, these just add a little bit of icing to the cake.
So, given all this, it's an S tier subclass. Are we in agreement on that?
I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 100% S tier.
Yeah, I honestly think that as we go through the rest of the fighter subclasses, I think that many of the fighter subclasses offer interesting specializations that within their specific specialization may outperform the Battle Master. But the Battle Master is always going to excel as long as you choose the right combination of Battle Master maneuvers and the right combination of other feats. You cannot go wrong with a Battle Master that takes Precision Attack, Great Weapon Master, or Sharpshooter, and Trip Attack. So if you don't know what to take those. Everything else is just gravy.
The great thing about the Battle Master is, like we've said several times, a lot of the maneuvers work with ranged attacks. They don't specify that it has to be a melee attack. This makes it one of the most versatile subclasses. You're not locked into anything. You have a wide range of options in any way that you decide to build it, any sort of theme that you're going for, any sort of role play that you have to explore. If you decided that you want to be a fighter, there's a good chance that your roleplay involves you kicking ass and taking names as a badass fighter on the battlefield. And the Battle Master is going to do that, whether you're an archer, whether you're wielding a two-handed weapon, whether you're a sword and board. No matter what, you get to be the badass. You get to trip up foes. You get to make sure that your hits land. You get to disarm them or shove them. There's some weaker options here and some stronger, but really, you're going to have a lot of fun no matter which Battle Master maneuvers you pick, and you're going to be able to flavor them to the idea that you had behind your fighter. This versatility and the ability to bring it into any sort of game and use it anywhere to great effect means that it's got to be an S tier.
And many of the maneuvers are flexible, allowing you to decide whether or not you want to use them after finding out if an attack has actually hit or missed. While there are saving throws for many of them, which does limit some of their usefulness, there are many maneuvers that don't rely on your enemies making saving throws at all whatsoever and just take effect right away, like Precision Attack. You're not limited in the number of times per round you can use your maneuvers. If you want to wreck somebody's day, you can just drop maneuvers on them, even once they're prone, just to get the extra damage that the maneuvers often cause. So this capacity, this flexibility, and this raw combat superiority, well, it's an aptly named class feature. This is the NES.
Next up, we come to the Cavalier, the noble warrior atop a loyal steed. Don't let the name Cavalier throw you off. This does depict the image of the knight atop a great steed riding into battle, but if you never mount your horse and you're always just on foot, you'll still excel with a lot of the great features the Cavalier offers. So let's take a look.
So as Kelly kind of intimated, the name Cavalier is a little bit misleading. And if you start reading the first two abilities granted by this subclass, the bonus proficiencies and Born in the Saddle, you might think that you're going to start reading the rest of the subclass and it's all going to be to do with mounted combat. And you're going to think, oh, well, if I don't have a mount or if my mount dies, all my abilities are useless. And this is completely untrue about this subclass, because the unwavering mark power is actually its defining trait. And one of the most unique powers in the game, in fact. When you hit a target with a melee weapon attack, you can choose to mark that target until the end of your next turn. The target stays marked by you unless you're incapacitated or somebody else, like another Cavalier, marks the target. While the marked target is within 5 feet of you, it has disadvantage on any attack made against a creature that is not you. If the target that you have marked damages somebody other than you, on your turn, you can use a bonus action to attack that target. You get advantage on that attack, and you deal extra damage equal to half your fighter level to them, and you can use this bonus action attack a number of times per day up to your strength modifier.
At 7th level, you gain Warding Maneuver, which means that if you or an ally that you can see within 5 feet of you is targeted by an attack, you can roll a d8 and add this to the AC of that creature. If the attack still hits, the creature has resistance to the damage. This ability uses your reaction, and you can use it a number of times equal to your con mod per day.
At 10th level, you gain the Hold the Line feature, which on paper looks a lot like the Sentinel feat. It causes creatures hit by your opportunity attacks to have their speeds reduced to 0. And if a creature within your reach moves more than 5 feet, it provokes an opportunity attack from you. What's different about this from the Sentinel feat is the Sentinel feat stops creatures from disengaging. But in practice, in 5th edition D&D, creatures can move within the reach of other creatures without provoking opportunity attacks. This means that if a creature is standing in front of you and is trying to use their movement to move around you, something that normally doesn't provoke an opportunity attack, this ability will trigger you to make an opportunity attack against them and stop them if you hit.
At 15th level, you get Ferocious Charger. If you run more than 10 feet towards your enemy and hit them with an attack, they have to make a saving throw or else be knocked prone. You can use this once per turn.
At 18th level, you gain the Vigilant Defender feature, which is pretty amazing actually, because this allows you to effectively take a reaction on every single creature's turn, except your own, and except when you use your own reaction. You can only use this reaction to make opportunity attacks, but in practice, this means that you get to make opportunity attacks every single time a creature provokes them, rather than be limited by the single reaction that you normally get per turn.
So when I look at the Cavalier fighter, this subclass really excels at some really cool things. And whether you're on your horse or off your horse doesn't seem to matter. And that's actually one thing that I misread the first time I read this subclass. And I gave this subclass a B ranking. Some of the features kind of overlap with the Sentinel feat, making me confused on whether I would want to take the Sentinel feat. But it's also missing a few gaps that I think it would benefit from still taking the Sentinel feat, meaning that there's this weird overlap of abilities. Lastly, the Cavalier does kind of lock you into a defensive playstyle. It doesn't offer the versatility of something like the Battlemaster, where you can go a whole bunch of different directions and still play a defending type of character. The Cavalier, you are playing that defender. You're not going to be the biggest damage dealer like some of the other fighter subclasses. Instead, you're going to rely on focusing the attacks towards you. If that's what you're going for, and that's the character you want to play, then this is going to be amazing, and it might be an A-tier subclass. For that reason, I give it a B, but it is definitely a high B because rereading the subclass, these features work on or off the horse, meaning that it really excels in more ways than I initially imagined.
So Kelly, I agree with you that this subclass is narrow. It really drives you towards a defensive playstyle, and I do personally think that with this subclass, you do want to take the Sentinel feat because you probably want the benefits that Sentinel gives you really early on, and I'd be tempted to take Sentinel at least with my level 6 ability and score increase, if not right away at level 4. And I would probably also consider taking Shield Master and possibly even Polearm Master and doing the Spear and Shield Spartan style, which is now possible because the Spear was added to the errata for Polearm Master. You've got the baseline features of the fighter like Action Surge and Second Wind to keep you in the fight. I don't know if you are as tough as some of the other tanks in the game, but your ability to control the battlefield and to control a large number of enemies is really amazing because this is reintroducing basically 4th edition and 3rd edition style defensive mechanics in 5th edition D&D. Here's where the subclass falters. If in your party you have a really great battlefield control spellcaster, or a really strong and tough front line, or you don't have squishies that you need to protect in your party, you kind of might falter a little bit here. The other thing that you might falter with yourself is that you're driving the attacks towards yourself and you don't necessarily have any more survivability from this subclass than the baseline fighter does. So you're going to have to find that in other ways. So for all those reasons, I think that there's a lot of reasons why the Cavalier might not be the right character for your campaign. But I think it excels within its specific area of specialization, and that's why I want to give it an A. I think it is really good at what it does, and what it does is useful in a battlefield situation. If you are playing Theater of the Mind combat, if you're not playing tactical combat, the value of this whole subclass tanks right down. But if you play that chessboard style combat, you got a lot to love here.
It's actually really tough because rereading the subclass, it's excellent. It's excellent. There are some excellent features. There is nothing here that takes away from the fighter in any way. It just adds to it. Yeah. And really, if you are going to take Polearm Master, Great Weapon Master, and Sentinel, that Great Weapon Master is going to make up for the fact that you're not the heavy hitter, but now you are.
Yeah, yep.
So you can be a really powerful fighter that may not be the biggest tank, but if you are teamed up with a great squishy healer who can make sure that you stay in combat and you can direct everything towards you, you can, as one of the ability states, hold the line.
Yeah.
And you can hold that line, letting your squishy mages and healers and whoever else is in the back lines stay put. You could play a Cavalier as the only frontline fighter and probably be a really important part of your team.
In 4th edition, this style of play worked really, really well, and it kept Dungeon Masters honest because of the focus on tactical combat that 4th edition had. But 5th edition really loosened that up. And so I want to give this subclass a conditional A.
I think I'm willing to concede to the A under those conditions, and I will say that at worst it's a B, which a B is still an A in the right campaign.
Yep.
So I think that this is good enough in most situations to give it an A. And if you're playing in a campaign that it doesn't work in, it's a B. It's still going to be good, but you might find that it's a little lackluster in an inappropriate setting.
If you're not using miniatures in a grid, don't even consider playing this class. I think that you really need the tactical combat to make it worth considering playing a Cavalier. And finally, we come to the champion, the archetypal, hey, welcome to Dungeons & Dragons. Here's a nice simple subclass to ease you into the game class. If the fighter is the perfect default class for a new player to D&D, then the champion doubles down on that idea, trading mechanical complexity and depth for simplicity and ease of use to make that new player experience really, really good. So let's take a look at why people call the champion the first port of call for new players in D&D.
So right away when you gain this subclass, you gain one of the easiest things to keep track of, and that is the improved critical. You now crit on a 19 or 20 instead of just a 20. Not bad.
At 7th level, you become a remarkable athlete, adding 1/2 your proficiency modifier to any strength, constitution, or dexterity ability check that doesn't already include your proficiency bonus. In addition, you add your strength modifier to the distance you cover when you make a running long jump.
At 10th level, you gain an additional fighting style. So now if you want to be able to switch between your sword or your bow, you can do that.
At 15th level, you now crit on an 18, 19, or 20.
And at 18th level, you have the ability Survivor that lets you regain hit points if you're below 50% health, 5 plus your con mod worth of hit points, unless you're at 0. So I originally was going to argue that the champion subclass was an A. And here's why. The champion subclass, by our definition of what A is, does not take away from the fighter subclass at all. As a matter of fact, it adds to the fighter subclass in meaningful ways. It makes your crits better. What fighter doesn't want to crit? You're getting a whole bunch of attacks as a fighter. So now you are going to be the crit king or queen when you play a champion fighter. You get to regain hit points when you reach the top levels. You get an additional fighting style. It all just makes the fighter more fightery. So I was like, yeah, definitely an A tier. Then I read it again this morning before we decided to film this, and I said, no, this is a C. This is the most boring subclass out of all the subclasses in the entire game. You can roleplay the heck out of a champion and have a lot of fun doing it. But at the end of the day, there's a certain excitement that comes from D&D by having cool abilities that you get to use and announce, I'm going to use this ability and it's going to be awesome. The champion doesn't give you that. So although it's adding to it, it feels like a C because it's just so bland, which if I'm battling constantly between whether this is an A or a C, it means that, yeah, it's a B. Is it a great choice for a new player? Probably. It's really easy to grasp. It really lets them feel like a powerful character. But if you have any experience playing D&D, this is one of the most boring options, and I can't see myself ever wanting to play a champion fighter because I would just be bored playing it.
I think the champion fighter is purpose-built to feel like you don't get a subclass. So I think that this is a subclass of abilities that you're going to forget that you have until you're like, oh yeah, I do crit on 19s. Cool. I think that it's actually very hard to quantify the value of an expanded crit range. which, considering how many dice a fighter is going to roll with all their attacks, means that it's going to feel like a lot of crits. It feels cool, and it feels like it's doing something. But I just can't get over the fact that I kind of don't like that this subclass gets recommended to new players. It is so brain dead simple that it feels mundane. If we're going to give this one a B, I'm going to do that reluctantly. Because I just don't like that it gets recommended to new players. I think that new players deserve more credit than we often give them. And new players deserve better than the champion fighter.
I have played a human champion fighter in a one-shot. And it was great for the one-shot. I had Polearm Master, Sentinel, Great Weapon Master, and I was playing a champion. I crit more often in that one-shot than I have with any other character. But really, my fun was coming from the use of Sentinel, Polearm Master, and Great Weapon Master, not from the champion subclass. And I realized that towards the end of that one-shot, and I realized that I would not enjoy playing this for a long campaign. But I just want a subclass to have more substance than this. It doesn't take away from the fighter at all. It actually adds to it in meaningful ways. But those meanings get lost, and they're kind of footnotes on what the fighter already is. And so, is it a great subclass? I feel very neutral about this whole thing. I won't ever say the champion is a bad subclass. I won't ever say it's a great subclass. It's somewhere in the middle, and you can play it if you want, and if you want something really, really simple to just get into the roleplay or get into D&D in a different way, then maybe you'll enjoy the champion fighter. So up on the screen right now, you're going to see our final rankings for the first 4 fighter subclasses. We are going to be looking at the other 4 subclasses and doing an overall total comparison at the end of the next video. And right now, let's take a look at the community votes and see how they stack up against our own.
The Arcane Archer had a little bit of a mixed bag, but 41.5% gave it a B tier ranking, with 17.5% giving it an A tier ranking, small percent giving it an S, but a very large chunk, 27%, giving it a C tier ranking, and 10.9% giving it a D tier ranking. This is, in fact, the second highest number of D tier rankings and the second highest number of C tier rankings across all the fighter subclasses. So while that does still put the Arcane Archer overall in the B category from the community, the number of people that rank this poorly is quite high.
When we move on to the Battle Master, it seems like the community really does agree with us here. It is sitting at a 54.8% S tier and a 37.1% A tier, with only a 6.8 B and very, very little C and almost no D rankings whatsoever. So this definitely falls into the largest amount of S tier rankings out of any subclass that the fighter gets, making it easily the S tier of all of the fighters.
I think there must be a lot of fans of 4th edition in our community, because 31% of them gave the Cavalier an A ranking, and 38% gave them a B ranking, with even 9.1% giving it an S tier ranking. A sizable chunk of the community, though, was not too happy with the Cavalier, with 17% giving it a C ranking and 4.8% giving it a D ranking. This is a pretty significant chunk of low rankings, but overall the response is positive, which I think very solidly places the community's response to the Cavalier as a B tier ranking.
With us, we gave it an A, but it was that sort of A with an asterisk, which I can see from the community here, the largest portions are A and B. This is probably one of the wider spreads that we've gotten. When we move on to the champion, we also get a pretty mixed response here. Moving down the list, if we look at the S tier getting a 7.9, A was given 30.2%, B tier for 34%, C tier at 19.5%, and D tier at 8.5%. A pretty even spread. It does land in the B category, and this really speaks to everything that we had to say about the champion, with it being either a really boring dull class that falls into the C or D tier, or being a really decent class that adds to the fighter in meaningful ways as an A or S tier, but landing safely, prominently in the B tier.
Looking over the community comments that were left about the champion, the biggest praises of the champion were its simplicity and effectiveness for a new player.
So up on the screen right now, you are going to see all of the community rankings based on the majority votes. And next to it here, you're going to see, again, our reviews of the subclasses. Pretty evenly matched, I'd say.
The Battlemaster comes out of the player's handbook utterly swinging, and I think many of the other subclasses are judged in its shadow, and rightly so. It is phenomenal, and it really does speak to a lot of the image that people want to have from the fighter as a badass master of war. So I can't judge you if you think that it blows the other ones out of the water, because I agree with you.
So this has been a look at our fighter subclass tier ranking for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about your favorite subclasses or your least favorite subclasses in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. All of our patrons, a big thank you from the bottoms of our heart. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You can find out how by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to check out some great fighters doing what they do best, don't forget to check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes of the current campaign right up over here.
And we have many more tier rankings and class guides for D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time
in the dungeon.